Hello YouTube. Today we have another PC build video. This time this is a rig that I'm building for my brother. It's basically a entry to mid-range desktop PC. Building it for his kids who plan to use it for gaming. So we did have to spec up a little bit on the components, and I'll just show you. So way at the back we have a Nimitz N5 macro ATX case, a vertical tower case, and I opted to go for the Corsair 650 watt 80 plus bronze power supply. It's a modular power supply. And then in terms of the components, you can see that I've opted for a Core i5 10400F. The F denotes the fact that this CPU does not have integrated graphics, so we will have to use a discrete graphics card, which we do have. I've got a relatively inexpensive RGB lit CPU cooler that should fit a 1200 LGA CPU. Went with the Kingston HyperX single stick 16 gig DDR4 2666 megahertz RAM. And then for the motherboard, I went with the Gigabyte B460M DS3H version 2. Okay, so that should fit the CPU. The CPU, by the way, is a 10th gen Comet Lake. And then I have a 480 gigabyte SSD. And for storage, I went with the Western Digital Blue 1 terabyte hard disk drive, 7200 RPM, SATA 6. And then for discrete graphics, I went with the Zotac GeForce GTX 1650, which should provide enough support for mainstream gaming. The card has 4 gigabyte DDR6 GDDR6 RAM, so that should give it some kick. Okay, so those are the components, and we'll go ahead and get cracking. Okay, first step, unboxing the case. As you can see, still nice in its wrapping, so we'll proceed to take a look inside. This is the first time I'm unboxing it, so I'm expecting a standard micro ATX case that should give plenty of room for the components here. All right, let's dig in. Okay, we've got the case unboxed. Let's take a closer look at it. Start from the externals. From the top, you can see the standard external ports. Looks like a USB 3, USB 2, audio in and out, power on, hard drive light, I guess, reset button, and main power button. The front looks okay, decent. Just a standard side cover. Oops, let's put it horizontal. So it's already taken out the screws that removes the glass panel on the right side, right? See, pretty decent looking case. So let's take a look, right? Remove the glass panel, and you can see pretty sizable space for a micro ATX. And this is what I like too. The power supply is at the bottom. Probably have to remove this cage. Okay, set of screws, front panel connections. Don't see any fans here. Probably have to get some extra, some 80mm and maybe 120mm fans to cool this baby up. But other than that, pretty standard case. Yeah, probably be a good idea to get some ventilation fans. Okay. Standard connectors. All right, and there is a. I thought I saw a here we go. 12-volt power connection. I don't see a fan. I'm guessing that probably runs the lights. This is an RGB case, so there's probably LED lights placed around the case itself. So it'll be interesting to see when we power it up later. Okay, that's the case. Okay, let's set this case aside for now. Let's take a look at the motherboard. We'll separate out the CPU, the RAM. Quick unboxing of the motherboard. Okay, and it's a typical anti-static enclosure, plastic enclosure. This looks to be serial ATA cables, just one set. Okay, let's see what else inside the box. We've got the I/O plate, several instructions, and what looks to be a driver CD. But nobody uses these days because nobody has an optical drive anymore. So we'll just install the OS and download the drivers from the Gigabyte website. Pretty sparse, but that's okay. Okay, closer look at the motherboard. Looks like a pretty standard layout. We've got 4 DDR, 4 RAM slots, 2 PCI Express by 16, 2 of the smaller ones. It's probably the PCH. That's the LG 1200 socket. Let's look at the rear panels. Still sporting a PS2 and a VGA cable, VGA port. We won't be using that, of course. We have DVI, we have HDMI, none of which we'll be using because the CPU does not have integrated graphics. So we'll be using a discrete card. You can see the 3 USB ports, the gigabit LAN. I wonder what that one is. And then the analog connections for audio. Right. So that's the 8-pin P4 connector, 24-pin 12 and 5 volts, and all your typical headers for USB, for HD audio, front panel, and so on and so forth. Let's see what else. Interesting layout for the SATA connections, to forward facing to upward facing, so total of 4. And looks like we do have an M2 slot here, but we don't have an M2 stick today, so we won't be using that. Right, and a quick look at the rear. That's the motherboard. Okay, unpacking the CPU. So with this side, cover up. I'm just gonna go ahead and rip open the box here. Okay, All right. So CPU is just slid at the side. There you go. Okay, let's put that aside. And then we have the fan or the cooler, which we won't be using. So I guess we'll keep this aside for now. Okay. And then we have the paperwork here, including that logo, which is what I'm looking for. All right, setting that aside. Okay, let's go ahead and mount the CPU. All right. So just removing the cover here and being very careful not to touch the pins on the socket because they are very fragile and can easily get bent or damaged, and that makes your motherboard toast, makes it a brick. So we're going to do that. All right, so coming in closer, we'll go ahead and remove the CPU, and taking into account the orientation, so we'll drop it in here, as so. You can see the keyed in slots there, and we can go ahead and close the lid. So remove the black plastic cover from the top of the lid, and then we can proceed to close the lid. Right, make sure that's aligned. Make sure it's snug. Okay, with the CPU securely inserted in the socket and the lid closed and locked, let's go ahead and put in the cooler. Okay, so we're now gonna install the cooler on top of the CPU. So let's quickly do an unboxing here. Remove this little piece of foam, some instructions, taking out of the box. Alright, we have the frame that attaches below the motherboard. That's it. Okay, so these are the instructions. We take the cooler, we mount it on top of the CPU, and it looks like these 4 posts are threaded. You can see here, these are probably plastic sleeves that you can remove. Oh, what are you doing here? Mari mai sini. You can see it's threaded. Please take that away. So that's the cooler flipped upside down. Just want to show you this little piece will actually mount on the underside with the threaded part, so we'll have to screw that in. But first we're going to apply some thermal paste. We've got some right here. Now we've got some thermal paste on. You might want to shave off a little bit, that seems a little excessive, so we'll do that. So now the cooler is securely mounted. It's a bit tricky. We needed to make sure that when we screwed it on, we alternated between the diagonals so that the cooler does not get slanted. This is the underside. Okay, so that frame is securely mounted. All right, so now that's done, we're going to go ahead and insert the DDR4 module, and we're going to put that into there. It's the Kingston HyperX Fury 16 gig RAM. Go ahead and open that up. There we go. So we'll just take this, stick it in one of the modules here. The RAM module is inserted. Okay. All right, we've done everything we can on this motherboard. We'll put in the only other thing that we need to do is put in the graphics card, but given that's a pretty big and hefty thing, we'll do it after the motherboard is mounted on the case. Take the I/O plate and mount it from inside, and then we can put the motherboard in. Sitting nice and flush now. Let's go ahead and put the motherboard in. So actually, before we put the motherboard into the case, we'll have to put the connectors in. Like this one is the USB 3.0. This looks to be the USB 2.0. Then this one is the HD audio, and we have an assortment of connectors for the switches and the LED power on switch, reset buttons, so on and so forth. Okay, let's review this mess of wires. I think starting from this side, you can see the USB 3 is plugged in, and then the front panel connectors. I didn't find the reset plugs, only the power switch, power LED, and the hard drive LED. Oh well, we'll go back and take a look. This is USB 2, and this is actually a special connector for the RGB lights. For the fan, they had a special connector, and thankfully there is a special header for that. Right, this is HD audio for the front audio connections. All right, so now I think we're ready to put the motherboard in. Okay, so the motherboard is fully mounted and secured on the base of the case, on the pan, I guess. So quite a bit of wire management to do here, but still we have a lot of work to do. We have to remove this case so that we can mount the power supply, and then we can then we have to mount the graphics card. Okay, and you can see the rear I/O connections are sitting flush against the plate. Okay, let's unbox the power supply. Alright, some instructions, power cord, and the 24 pin 12 volt, 8 pin 12 volt for the P4, and an assortment of other connectors. Take the whole thing out. And these are the 4 mounting pins for the power supply. That's the power supply unit, and I'm going to try and see how we can fit it into this slot. Shouldn't be a problem. The fan goes to the bottom. You can see the mesh there where the ventilation goes through, and then we'll have to manage the wires that I guess go through either that slot there or these 2 slots. So let's get to it. Okay, Now that power supply is mounted and flush to the back, next step would be to manage these wires and connect to the motherboard, connect to the SATA drives, both SSD and the HDD drives, and then of course all other connections, you know, to power the motherboard and the graphics card. I'll do the graphics card next. Okay, let's unbox the graphics card. What do we have here? Looks like a CD. Nice sleeve. Very simplistic. Just a card. Let's remove it from its case here, or sleeve. Pretty short. So that's not going to be a problem fitting in there. You can see that we have HDMI port, display port, and a DVI port. Okay, pretty compact. Okay, let's put it in. Interesting thing is, I don't see any power connections. It looks like it's gonna draw power from the edge fingers here. Hopefully that's good enough. I'm sure it is. Okay, so we managed to insert the 24-pin main power connector to the motherboard that provides it 12 and 5 volts. So still a bit of a mess of wires. We'll sort that out later. Now what we want to do is put these guys in, right? The SSD and the hard drive. And I think what we're going to do is put them down here. I don't see any other mounting positions, so right behind the power supply. Alright, so let's get cracking. Yes, we before we mount the SSD and the hard drive, we're gonna have to put these serial ATA cables in. I think I'll just use those two slots that are vertically facing upward.
Focus.
So finally mounted the hard drives. I couldn't find a proper location for the SSD for now. It is strapped to the top of the cage, and the other drive is located at the bottom, right next to the power supply.
Good boy.
Some basic wire management just to reduce the clutter, but essentially we are ready to power on.
See, he sits just like dog.
So this is the final product, everything assembled. I've got the glass panel installed as well. Actually looks pretty nice. You can see the components inside. I'm excited to power it on, see how the RGB lights illuminate the case. But she's good to go, assembled and ready for power on. Okay, the PC has successfully powered on. The lights on both the CPU cooler and the case is lit. I am in the process of installing the operating system, and we're done. Another PC built. So we're probably just gonna do some cleanup of the wiring here, but it looks like it's pretty much done. And get how quiet that system is. You can hardly hear the fans for the CPU and the graphics card. Can hardly hear them. Maybe the one thing that I do need to do is add a couple of 80mm ventilation fans. You know, there's none now, so that's not really a good situation to be in. So I'll grab a couple of those fans maybe tomorrow and have them installed. Thank you for listening.